Hey guys, Woods Farm here. Just back working on the Kubelwagen today. The last couple of videos I was talking about this rear suspension issue and adjusting the torsion bars, and that's what we're going to look at doing today. Bit of a tricky job. Not 100% confident, but part of the problem is I might have kind of built myself into a corner with the way I mounted the fender, not thinking ahead and not really understanding what was going on in here. I'm not sure I can get the cover plate off. That's going to be an issue. Already here are these 3 bolts that hold the swing arm to the spring plate. They're being very difficult. Obviously they have, they've been on there for 50 years and they just don't want to come off. We had to use a lot of heat, but we did get them loose. So the next step is to work on these 4 here on the cover plate. Again, very tight access, and these bolts are going to be really tricky. Once that happens, we got to pry out the spring plate. It should come down under tension. We got to make adjustments on the spline torsion bars to try to give it a little more pressure, spring pressure or tension, and hopefully that will keep the ride height a little bit higher. I'm aiming for like at least an inch, but 1.5 inches, 2 inches would be good if we could get there. But I mean, the main thing is just getting this thing apart and being able to actually put it back together when we're done. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so we got the swing plate, or the spring plate, I guess it's called, off, unbolted. And we're just measuring it as like a default. I think this is where some guys go wrong on the internet. They don't actually measure. And we're looking at right around 20 degrees, which it should be just a hair over 20 degrees based on the manuals. The information I found online was like between 20 and 21 degrees is the stock setting. So, and what we need to do now is we need to get this arm shifted down. I believe we can go a maximum of 8 to 9 degrees, and that should give us 1.5 inches to 2 inches, hopefully. So there's been a lot of, we got everything, these bolts actually came off easy. The plate, the cover plate, we had to pry it off. It was a little bit tricky, and it's got some damage, but we're going to keep going ahead here and work on trying to get this torsion bar out so we can adjust it. Okay, so we skipped past all the crazy difficult stuff. We're just testing it out here. We weren't 100%. The clearance went up a little more than I had kind of expected. It was at around 3 inches, and now it's like 5.5, almost 6 inches. I kind of thought it was only going to go up 2. We went 10 degrees, give or take, on the spring arm, which is the max that they recommend. And this is what we ended up with. There is some suspension travel. I do have some concerns with the axles. You can't see that, but I think we're going to go ahead and work on the other side and just see how this rides and go from there. Okay, so that's what it looks like now that it's raised up. And what ended up happening is it went up from 3 inches to about 5.5. So an increase of 2.5 inches, and it was pretty much the same on the other side. So the job didn't go quite as planned. For starters, I had bought new bushings and we were not able to get them to fit. I don't know if it's just because they're aftermarket and they were just a little bit out of spec, but as much as we struggled, we could not get the spring plate back into place and bolted on with the cover with the new bushings. They just seem to be slightly oversized. So I don't know if I need to buy a higher quality set of like maybe polyurethane ones. Seem to be popular, maybe a better set. Definitely beware of buying just the standard replacement rubber bushings, because like I said, I think they were slightly oversized. We could not get them to work. The other thing is, this is actually a little bit higher than I had expected. I was kind of thinking of the max I would get is probably a 2-inch lift, and like I said, we're easily up 3 inches in that range. So part of that is because as much as we tried to adjust the inner and outer spline on the torsion bar, we could only seem to get about 10 degrees of movement down one way. So for instance, we measured the angle of the spring plate on the driver's side, and it was around 20 degrees, which information online says that's the stock kind of position. And no matter how much we monkeyed around with it, we could only really get a 30-degree change, or a 10-degree change down to around 30 degrees. So I did find some information that said you probably shouldn't go any more than 8 or 9 degrees over the stock setting, but we just could not get anything but like a 10-degree increment, no matter how much we moved the inner and the outer spline around and played with it. So obviously I'm missing something, but we got this much, and it is a lot better. So we'll just have to see how that works out. Here's a chart that I got off the internet, and it just kind of shows what the different changes for the inner and outer. So if you see here, one movement on the outer was only supposed to get us 8.8 degrees 10 minutes, which was a 2.17 inch lit raise. One change on the inner was around 9 degrees, so we're probably more in that ballpark, a 2.36 change in height. But like I said, my measurement shows more like a 3-inch raise, and measuring the angle of the spring plate, it was more like 10 degrees. So yeah, take that at face value. I don't know. We're just gonna have to drive the car around and see how it handles, and hopefully I don't break a torsion bar. Another option is to go to a stiffer aftermarket torsion bar. You can get softer ones and you can get stiffer ones. So in my situation, a stiffer one might be called for. Just some quick words of advice if you are doing this project. There's a bunch of other tutorials on YouTube for beetles. Go ahead and watch those. Obviously I skipped over a whole bunch of stuff, but if you're doing this job and this has never been taken apart before, which was the case with this thing chassis, you're going to want to make sure you have a torch, a big breaker bar, and probably, if possible, if you have air tools, an impact, because these 3 bolts were almost impossible to loosen off. We had to hit them with multiple rounds of the heat, and basically heat, WD-40, impact, heat, WD-40, impact, and finally they cracked and loosened off. So be prepared. The other trick is to get everything, before you put the spring plate up and get it over the catch lip, make sure you have this on with your bushings and have it on, and have these 4 bolts in place. And then once you get it pushed up, we used a jack underneath it, a floor jack, and pushed it up under tension and got it over the spring lip, and then we tightened these bolts down. These bolts came off no problem. They weren't super tight, they came off, but it was really tricky to get this all lined back up so it'll go on. So keep that in mind. I'm eventually going to go to some coilovers, I think. And I do think that, unfortunately, I might have messed this up. I think this bump stop needs to be down a little bit further. I think it may have been set up so that this was flush with this, so we're probably like 3/4 of an inch too high. Not the end of the world. It's just gonna, bottom out probably a little more frequently. So in the process of doing all this suspension work, I realized that I was actually missing one of the bolts for the shock. One of the other bolts is stripped out. So I went to the hardware store today and got some properly sized bolts. These are metric fine thread. They're pretty close to the exact original bolts that were in there. So I'm just going to replace these. It's just one of those things that happens when you're doing a restoration. You lose parts, misplace things, stuff gets stripped and broken. So these kind of shocks were sort of just haphazardly bolted in there. I think this is just a 5/16 or something, and just to hold it there. So right now I'm just going to put in the proper bolts and finish that up. I'll tell you, this style Volkswagen bolt, instead of a stud, you've got like a bolt, and it is a pain in the ass to work with. Okay, that just about wraps up the suspension work that I'm going to do for now. Got the ride height raised up. The only other thing I can really do is maybe put in a set of coilover shocks in the back and see if that helps. But for now, I'm just going to leave it, see how it drives, and come back to it if it's any sort of an issue. I've got some other projects coming up, so keep an eye out for other videos. One of the big things that's going to be coming up in the next month is probably starting to work on the canopy top. That's going to require using the old thin canopy. I'm going to modify that structure, get it to mate up with the front windshield, and then when that fabricating is done, I'm actually going to be doing some sewing and leather work to actually make a canvas top to go over top of that. So that's going to be an interesting part of the project. Definitely like and subscribe if you want to see more Kubelwagen videos. Feel free to leave a comment down below or a question. And as always, thanks for watching.